Happy Thursday, Muskie fans. We're here on our RazerCast. That's Reaker and Zink talking Xavier Basketball in a big week. We'll be talking about a lot of things. We'll be getting to that Creighton big win against the top 25 team. Of course, we'll have our preview for the Nova game on Saturday. A couple other things. Talk a little bit about this year's recruiting class. And, of course, the win against DePaul. But first we'll say hello to Jim Reaker on the other side. Jim, are you rested and refreshed from last night's big victory?
I sure am. That was actually an early start, a 6:30 start. So the problem was, getting down there in time, having to deal with a little rush hour traffic to get to the Cintas Center on the Xavier campus. But we got there just as the national anthem was being sung, so we didn't miss any of the important stuff, and then had a little winter wonderland coming home with that snow that kind of hit about that time. Wasn't sticking to the road, so it was kind of an enjoyable drive. We haven't seen much of that white stuff this year.
And, of course, you came in with a victory. Let's talk about that first before we move on to some other things. Fantastic night for the Muskies. They led for 38 of the 40 minutes. They're saying that, 4 players had record-setting career highs last night. But tell us what looked good to you last night against the Blue Demons.
Well, I think some fans may have thought that the Musketeers would have an easier time with the Blue Demons. But, again, we've talked about before in the Big East, all the teams are a challenge on any given night. And the fact that we've mentioned before that the Blue Demons could have beaten Butler at home if they would have made a free throw in regulation, and also gave the Villanova Wildcats a scare on their home court very, very early in the season. They have some very talented players, so the win is a big takeaway from the game, especially it being, you couldn't set a more perfect trap, as we talk about a lot of times in the schedule. After the big win out at Creighton to even up the season series with them, and then looming number 2, Villanova. Everybody's looking forward to that. This little game here in the middle on a Wednesday night could have been a trap, but the Musketeers got the win and move on, and, of course, are in the loss column just a game out in first place. Really, in the loss column, have second place all to themselves right now, as Creighton and Butler have both experienced their 4th loss for the season.
Yeah. Well, you're right. Could have been a trap game. But a lot of beautiful things came out of it. Like Xavier put out 4 guys with record-setting nights. Quentin Gooden with a career high in assists with 8. J.P. Makura had a career high of assists with 6, and they're both going to be needed on Saturday. Kaiser Gates with a career high in rebounds with 10, and Rasheed Gaston tied his career high of 14 points. One of the beautiful things is they were able to limit the minutes of some people. Blewett did get 36 minutes after playing 40 against Creighton, and coach was able to empty the bench. So you got everybody down there, Barr, Peterson, Tran, Bergen, Stainbrook, all got in the game, even if it was just in the last minute or two. But Gates got 22, Gaston got 20 coming off the bench, and a team that's only been going 7 or 8 deep, it's got to be refreshing heading into the big game on Saturday, which we'll talk about in just a little bit.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I set up a list here that I labeled positive and negative, and actually the positive list was much longer than the negative list. Again, Quentin Gooden had a career high 8 assists, and ever since he's taken over, I think he's had 6, 5, and 8. And so even though his average only shows, I think, 2.5 right now, that is because of the games he's played where he didn't get a lot of minutes. Trayvon Blewett, just take a minute to talk about him. Not only has he really hit his stride in scoring, but something that doesn't get talked about a lot is he actually averages 6 rebounds a game and is actually second on the team, just right behind Rasheed Gaston, who's at 6.3. And he's doing all this on a severely injured ankle. He sprained his ankle pretty good against Seton Hall about a week ago and has continued to play on it. And, of course, in this day and age, a sprained ankle is just a minor injury in college basketball. I'm sure you remember back when we were kids, if you sprained an ankle, you were probably sitting for a week, and it was going to take another week or 2 to get you back to full strength. But in this day and age, a sprained ankle with all the medical advances we've made and all the treatment that they give the players now actually doesn't – you can continue and not miss a beat, although I'm sure he's been through a lot of pain. But he's been a true warrior and is actually the leader of this team, especially since Edmund Sumner has gone down. Rasheed Gaston and Tyreek Jones together had 22 points. Again, they are sharing that low post position with Sean O'Mara. And it seems like, kind of talking last night, it's almost like Coach Mack gives each of them about a 3-minute audition in each game, and whichever two are playing the best, he kind of goes with them the rest of the game. As we remember, Sean O'Mara had a big game against Seton Hall, had, I think, 10 points, 5 rebounds just a week ago, but he hasn't done so well. He didn't play that well against Creighton, and he definitely didn't play very well last night. And so he, I think, only got 3 minutes. But, again, it keeps those players motivated. In fact, somebody asked me last night, they said, Tyreek Jones has been starting. Do you think Coach Mack's done that just to motivate Rasheed Gaston as he kind of went through a lull there in his performance for a few games? And I said, no, I don't really think so. I think because what I've known about Coach Mack is he usually starts the 5 that he thinks deserves to start given how they've practiced. And, yeah, Kaiser Gates, 10 rebounds, and he's almost found that knack for rebounding. Kind of reminds me of James Farr. James Farr came into Xavier kind of like Kaiser Gates as a big shooting man, somebody that could pull people away from the basket and shoot and then drive if he's making his threes. And, of course, Coach Mack has called him probably the best shooter on the team many times. But 10 rebounds, which was a career high for him. And, again, what we see all the way around is just different players stepping up in different roles to make them a better team, especially with the loss of Sumner. The big negative was the turnovers, and Coach Mack didn't harp on that too much. They had been only averaging about 8 turnovers a game the last 3 games, and I've talked before, I think for success you have to try to keep your turnovers under 10 for the game and your assists at near 20. Coach Mack attributed that. He thinks the team's a little bit tired, played a little bit sloppy. But just to finish up this section, I liked what Byron Larkin said last night in the interview with Coach Mack. He said, I kind of look at this as the Muskies played to their competition tonight, meaning that they didn't play as well as they could have, but they played well enough to beat the team on the court. He says, now, if they do that on Saturday, I'll be okay with it.
Well, that's right, and then we'll talk a little bit about that and coming up. But first, we're talking about the present, but let's talk a little bit about the future. It's coming up on that time where lots of recruiting news, and ESPN right now has Xavier as the 11th class for the 2017 recruiting. They've got 6 what they consider top dingers, 4 4-stars. Coming in, and right now they consider them the best recruiting class coming into the Big East. So what kind of news do you have on the kids that are coming in for next year?
Well, generally I don't pay too close attention to, I'll read all the articles when they pick up a new recruit and kind of look over it and say, that he looks like a good player, what they need. The overall story here is just the depth of this class. Again, we have 5 players who will be coming into the college scene for the first time, and the 6th we refer to is one they just picked up, Brady Ernst, another big man who initially went to Iowa State but then transferred to a JC because of an injury or his progress coming back from that injury right out of high school. But again, the overall story is just the length of these players. It used to be, you can go back to not so long ago, Drew Lavender, who was 5'8". Even Lionel Chalmers, 6 foot. Xavier has reached a point now where even their perimeter players are 6'4", 6'5", 6'6", and again, that's what you see in this class. The smallest one, the point guard, and different sites report different heights. Of course, that's very common in basketball, what the true height is. But some people have Paul Scruggs even at 6'4", but he is the true point guard and probably the star of the class, so to speak. He actually comes from nearby Indianapolis. He's played at Southport High School, actually led Southport High School, I think, to a regional championship, the first one they'd had in about 20 years. And Southport High School is a pretty big high school, so I think they're playing at the top level in Indiana. But this year he actually transferred to a school out in California, prep school, for his senior year, and did a little bit of reading about this school. School's only 3 years old, and actually it's technically not a school in the fact that Prolific Prep is really a basketball program, and what they do is they partner with the nearby Catholic school, so the students are getting quality academic instruction at this nearby Catholic school. But Prolific Prep, when you talk about that, that's just the players, and they go out and they play a national prep schedule. And he's actually playing with Gary Trent Jr. out there, which I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I didn't check this, you may remember, Gary Trent, I believe, played at OU. I think, wasn't he the one they called the Shack of the Mac back in the day? But his son is playing there, and he's actually committed to Duke. And they've been good friends, I guess, since they were like about 7 years old. The two of them, they played on the AAU circus. So he is the center jewel of this. But we also have Najee Marshall from Maryland. He's a 6'6" perimeter player. His issue may be, what I've read, is he may have problems with eligibility. In fact, as a sophomore in high school, he was actually ineligible. He's actually at Hargrave Military Academy, and Coach Xavier fans, that'll catch your ear, because the other player that played at Xavier, one of them was David West, who went there also before he came to Xavier and had, of course, his National Player of the Year career and season a few years back, and now, of course, he stars in the NBA. And actually, I think he's with the Warriors now. He's trying to get that NBA ring one way or another, so he's almost done with his career. Another player, Jared Ritter, out of Springfield, Missouri. I like the high school name, Kickapoo High School. He's a 6'7", and he's, I think, what I've seen. I've tried to watch some video on all these guys and get a feel for him, and he kind of looks like almost like a JP Macura with maybe a little bit smoother shooting. JP can light it up sometimes, but JP sometimes is erratic with his outside shooting, and this guy may be the best shooter out of all these. Elias Harden is a 6'5" shooting guard coming out of Atlanta, Georgia, and was reading that Kaiser Gates kind of had a little help with him. They're kind of from the same area. Him coming in. And then I think one might be a crowd favorite, the last one they picked up, and actually the four I just talked about are all 4-star recruits. And the only 3-star recruit that they got out of this coming class is a man named Contravius Jones, or some have started to call him Basketball Jones. Supposedly his self-given name is the Big K. So he's 6'11", and right now 285 pounds. Now, I read a story about him earlier. I think from last basketball season to this season, he's already lost 60 pounds. So he was well over 300 at one point. And his goal, I believe, is to hit about 250 before he gets on the Xavier campus. So he's still working out a lot and watching what he eats, trying to get down to a slim 250. At 6'11", 250 probably is pretty slim. He might be a project. Again, he's worked a lot on his physique, trying to get in shape for the college game. But again, a big man at 6'11", and of course, just recently they picked up Brady Ernst, who's a 6'10" post player. He's the young man who had knee surgery coming out of high school, was initially recruited by Iowa State, only played 6 games, was having trouble with his recovery, so he was redshirted right at the beginning of his freshman year. Then he decided to leave Iowa State, maybe some differences with the coaching staff there. But this year he's gone to a junior college, Indian Hills Community College out in Iowa. And so he will be coming to the Xavier program next year. He's a 6'10" post player, and he will be eligible immediately because he went to a junior college, and he has 3 years of eligibility left. So it's a deep, deep class. You know, you might see one of these guys who maybe doesn't adjust right away actually being red-shirted. And you also, here might be something, now you might disagree a little bit on this, but Paul Scruggs, people are saying he may be a one and done. And that could kind of maybe be a first in Xavier history. Of course, we always talk about UK and Duke having the one and done. So that's where Xavier is, though. I think we continue to move forward. And so it's going to be an exciting, I mean, the future's only brighter the way I look at it.
Lots of great things coming on there with those 6 gentlemen that you talked about. Of course, we've got 5 seniors on this year's squad. So space will be made available there. We just got to work it out with the walk-ons on how they go. But looks like a lot of the strengths of the Xavier program will be well taken care of. Now we can move on to, we skipped over the Creighton win because we thought that would be a better lead into this weekend's game against Nova. Of course, that was last week. Xavier finally gets their signature win, if you want to call it that. They've, all of their losses have been to ranked teams except for the one to Colorado, and they haven't slipped up, as we'll talk about, in the Big East yet. But what did you see in that Creighton win last week that lets you know that we've got possibilities here on Saturday against Villanova?
Well, what I saw was the willingness not to quit. They were down double digits at one point in the second half in that game, and you kind of kept thinking, man, maybe it's going to get out of control. But again, you saw Quentin Gooden having a very good game. He's going to get a little bit more pressure than Edmund Sumner bringing the ball up just because he is a freshman. He doesn't have much experience. In fact, last night you saw DePaul pretty much the entire second half had a full court press on the Musketeers. And even though they had 19 turnovers, not many of them, if maybe a couple, were attributed to that press. Actually, Quentin Gooden, I see we're depending on him now. He's played very, very well, running the team, getting in the lane, hitting the open shooter on the perimeter. But he got in foul trouble last night. One of the reasons why he only played about 30 minutes. In fact, he picked up his 4th foul with about 10 minutes left in the game, which caused them to go to J.P. McCura actually running the point, and they looked a little rough at that point, although they still got the ball up the court. And I'm sure it's something they worked on because if you watch the Creighton game, one of the heart attack moments was trying to get the ball in about 3 or 4 times in a row because Creighton only had 2 fouls at the end of the game when they had to start fouling. So the Musketeers would get the ball in, they would foul, but they'd have to take it right back out because they weren't in the bonus yet. And, in fact, they didn't get it in twice. They made steals, although one would be questioned as J.P. McCura was almost thrown to the ground when the ball was stolen by him. I guess that's what you call a homer officiating crew. I'm not sure. I shouldn't have said that. But anyway, here's my big takeaway from the game is they won it in a hostile environment. We've talked again about Creighton's one of the toughest places to win. In fact, I believe since the two have been in the Big East, that's the first time that the Musketeers have won at the CenturyLink Center. So you got to like that going forward. There's a lot of tough games coming up. And, of course, we'll have the Big East tournament in New York City and then on to the NCAA tournament. So, again, just being able to deal with these experiences, overcome whatever adversity has met them, and continue to win games. In fact, a statistic I saw that I think kind of is a great one to look at the way this season's going. In games decided by 4 or less points, the Musketeers are 5-1. So that's what I took from the Creighton game. I don't know if you got a chance to see it, if anything else to add to that you saw.
Well, I just you hit on it. It was nice, a win against a team that's had to retool after losing their star. And now what's been great about Coach McDermott is he's refocused his offense to go back into the paint away from having an outside shooting team. So we dealt with that. It was basically a different team from the one we saw, or different approach, I should say, not a different team. Another good thing was we had 4 players score 15 or more, so we're spreading that around. We're going to need that on Saturday. A couple of negative free throws, again, only 8 for 14. Can't do that, but the shooting was up over 50%. So lots of good things. They controlled the paint. It was very sloppy there at the end. I mean, could have gone either way. I can see not only the throwdown, but there were a couple of turnovers late, especially on Creighton. They had a chance to come down and tie it or even win it and threw the ball out of bounds. But it just goes to show that Creighton hasn't fallen apart the way we thought they would, and it's a big win for the Muskies. Everybody's been talking about how they don't have that, and especially it's a big win going into Saturday. So, from what you've seen, and we know that last year Nova came in here as number 1. Of course, that time the Muskies were number 5, but the Muskies were able to defeat them kind of handily. So what has to happen on Saturday for the Muskies to triumph over the Wildcats?
Well, I think if you're going to look to where they might have an advantage, again, it is, I think, in the post. I think Tyreek Jones is going to have a big game. Rasheed Gaston is going to have a big game. But, of course, where the Wildcats will hurt you, and they always have, is from the perimeter. So I think they also have to try to limit their perimeter shots and play good perimeter defense. Now, I don't know if you got a chance, but I watched him play the other night against Georgetown, and they almost had Georgetown on the verge of a blowout. But in the second half, at one point, I remember Hart, Brunson, and Jenkins, of course, their 3 big three-point shooters, were 0 for 14. And that allowed the Hoyas to get back into the game, actually pulled it within 2 inside, I think, about 2 minutes. Of course, then Josh Hart, as a true leader does, came down and hit a big 3 that put them up by 4 and kind of let them salt the game away at the free throw line from that point on. But I think the Musketeers just have to play good defense and make the most of their possessions. They can't have 19 turnovers, but they have to make the most of their possessions. I think they have to out-rebound the Wildcats like they do most of their opponents and get a few extra possessions themselves. They just can't have, and this is a weakness that I've seen a little bit, is they tend to have about every game about a 3 to 5, maybe 6 or 7 minutes at one point recently where they kind of go into a scoring slump where they're just not getting good looks or good shots. Just seems to be the offense kind of gets into where it's not flowing very well. They can't have one of those moments, especially if one of those moments is crossed up with one of those moments where the Wildcats are hitting 3 or 4 three-pointers in a row, which they tend to do sometimes. So that's the way I see it. The other advantage, of course, is it's going to be in the Cintas Center. It's a national game. It's on National Fox. It's going to be a wild, especially 2:30 in the afternoon. That's prime time for college basketball on Saturday. So I think the Musketeers will be ready and do what they take or what they need to try to pull this win out.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. It's not like last year or they were so close. I think the home atmosphere is going to have to do something for them. Jay Bellis of ESPN has Nova as the best team in the country, and he's got Xavier ranked at number 29, just ahead of Kansas State and Wichita State. So he's leaning heavily toward that. I think one of the key elements here is that Josh Hart, Chris Jenkins combo. They've got that leadership there that's going to make a big difference for Villanova. And right now, we do have Trevon Blewett. It just seems like they're the more complete team, but that doesn't mean it can't be done. I think one of the other factors that's going to go into it is, we have to have a very solid game in the paint, like you were talking about, and keep them from the flow that they need. And that's what happened last year. They may feel like they have to sort of stick it to us after last year's loss. I mean, Nova has pretty much owned Xavier since they both moved into the Big East. I think it's now it's 7 out of 8 that Nova has won with that, or I think it's 6 out of 8, something like that, with last year's game being one of the few Xavier victories. And at that time, there were lots of things that went right. Xavier out-assisted them 24-15, and they both had about 10 turnovers, so there we go that way. And they out-rebounded them by 7. Couple of differences there are that, last year Xavier was going 9 deep. Now they're going 8 deep, and really not 8 deep. Like you said, you've got that triumvirate in there that Coach Maxworth sees who's hot, whereas Villanova goes a true 8 deep, and they've got, those 8 all playing 24-plus minutes, and 4 of them scoring double digits. That's why I mentioned it's good that Blue is going to be rested. He played 40 minutes against Creighton. Last time Nova made 12 3-pointers to X's 7. But one of the key differences was Xavier got to the free throw line for 33 shots, and that turned it over. So Xavier has to play a game like that where they control the paint, which is what's going to get them to the free throw line. They haven't been getting there as much as possible, and then hitting those free throws as well as taking no out. Can they do it? Yes, I think they can. As you say, anything can happen in the Big East. I don't think it's as possible as it was last year, but knowing that they have to win this game if Xavier wants to win the Big East will also be a big thing. We'll talk about that in a minute after I've given you a chance to sort of talk about some of the things I've laid out there.
Yeah, and here's another thing that some of the national pundits have talked a little bit about regarding Villanova. They won the national championship last year. They've won the Big East. What is this? I believe this is the 4th, maybe 5th season since the reorganization, and they've won it every year. So maybe they're not as hungry. They're not as concerned. Xavier would like to win their first Big East championship, so maybe they're a little bit more motivated. But as somebody said the other night, it's almost like Villanova is just waiting around for the NCAA tournament, because the big thing on their minds is people are asking the question, can they win it again? Can they repeat? Because I believe they would be the first to repeat in quite a while. I believe there was a Duke team, and I'm thinking it was the early 90s, that won back-to-back. So that's kind of been maybe their big goal, or the big thing on their mind is, can we win 2 in a row? Especially, they won it last year, which a lot of people thought that they couldn't do that up against some of the big blue bloods, and of course they did that. So I think maybe that's an advantage for the Musketeers, that maybe this is not as big a game for Villanova. But then I go back to what you just said, and I have to agree with you. They're not going to come in here thinking that it can't happen, because I know it happened last year to a very, very good team that did end up winning the national championship. So they may be a little motivated for the revenge in the Cintas Center. But as a Xavier fan, these are the days you look forward to. These are the days you live for, especially for those of us that, started 30 years ago, back when it was just a nice mid-major program that was starting to have a little success in the NCAA tournament. But, we talk about where we are, and you talk about the recruiting class coming in, and you talk about, the Big East is just a lot. The Big East is the reason why Xavier's getting the players they are now, because of the exposure. And then just think about this, because the Big East, when they did reorganize, happened to be one of the first big programs that the new Fox Sports picked up. Now you kind of look at it, there's ESPN and there's Fox Sports, and Fox Sports has made the Big East pretty much their centerpiece. So, that's one of the reasons why players are coming to Big East schools like Xavier, because they know they're going to be on TV probably twice a week and be, one of the main games on the Fox network. So it's going to be exciting. It's one of those games where, I could probably sell my season ticket, which I think when it comes down to is about a $15 ticket. I could probably sell it for about $75. But I wouldn't do that, because the experience is going to be, it could be one of those days like last year that you remember for a long, long time.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. You got to remember that last year's team, and we'll talk about whether or not they can repeat later. You are skipping and not giving your due to the Florida Gators, who repeated there in the odds. But you're right, it doesn't happen often. That's one of the things to talk about on our broadcast as we come through. And last year, Nova, the only non-top 16 team they lost to was Seton Hall in the conference finals. And when it comes to revenge, one of those teams that they lost to was number 7 Oklahoma. So they lost to by 23 early in the year. And I think everybody remembers what happened when they faced Oklahoma in the semifinals. They beat them by 44. So I think Coach Wright remembers these things. The players remember those things. So Xavier's going to have to be on their best game. That teaches us to the other thing, which is, you mentioned Xavier winning the Big East. I'll start with this a little bit. First of all, Saturday is a must-win. If they want to win the Big East, they can't fall further behind. And, of course, have lost 2 games to Villanova because Villanova's not going to lose 2 more games in the ones that they have. But Xavier does have the easier schedule through the rest of the year. They've got Providence, Marquette, and Seton Hall, even those are all away. Then they've got to face Butler and Marquette at home before traveling to Chicago for DePaul, whereas Nova still has to face both Butler and Creighton at home, though. They got DePaul, Seton Hall, and then the end of the season with Georgetown away. So Xavier, you talked about this last week, and you said you thought going 6-3 in the second half would be okay too. But if they can run the table, and that looks like a schedule to me that they could win the table. Of course, they have to start on Saturday. They could end up at least tied for the Big East lead, because one thing that Xavier hasn't done that the 3 ahead of them have done is slip against the lesser opponent. Nova lost to Marquette, Butler's lost to St. John's and Georgetown, Creighton to Marquette and Georgetown. Here I'm talking in the league. So Cincinnati's favorite team there, and Xavier, of course, the Bearcats fans won't like that. If they can keep it up in the Big East, on top of winning on Saturday and run the table, or the worst, go 5-1. Of course, if it can't beat a Butler, because then Butler would jump over them in the standings. There's still that chance to win the Big East title. Your thoughts?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And in fact, I remember on this broadcast last week, I made the comment that they controlled their own destiny, because if they did win out, they would at least tie Villanova, because they had the game coming up with Villanova, which would give them the same number of losses. And I remember you made the comment, well, we know that's not going to happen. And maybe it's not, but again, I like somebody's termed it the grit of this team. And I also like the fact that I think, and this is Chris Mack, and I think Chris Mack, again, if we were a call-in show, we would have lots of calls on the other side of this, but I think Chris Mack is an excellent coach in a lot of different ways. Number one is recruiting, as we just saw, but also his game-in adjustments he makes and the way he prepares for different teams. He's almost like the Bill Belichick of college basketball, in that you never know what he's going to bring out. For example, in the last couple of weeks, he's brought out a 2-3 zone that they've never played before. In fact, he talked about it on his show. He says, we've maybe practiced that defense 45 minutes all year, because we just went to it in order to save fouls, because our bench has become so thin. So I just think that he keeps them focused on the next step, and he doesn't let them look too far ahead. And in fact, in his press conference this week, he said, I don't even have to say to them that DePaul is the next game and we got to focus on DePaul, even though we know Villanova is looming. He said, I don't have to say that to them. They know that. So I think they almost have taken in the character of Chris Mack. It's one game at a time, and you can't get caught looking down the road at, what we're going to win, who we have to play next, or in the next 3 games, what big games coming up. Butler's coming up down the road. It's just one game at a time. Get ready for that one game. And, I think it's a great way to look at the season. So, it's going to be tough. In fact, I got, this Saturday, Villanova at home. I'll be there. Next Saturday, I'll be in Milwaukee for the big Marquette game. And, of course, that's a big day for Marquette. That's National Marquette Day, where they have alumni from all over the country. All the famous alumni from Marquette will be there. It's like a big party in Milwaukee all day, and I'm not sure why, but they chose Xavier. It's almost like their homecoming, and they chose Xavier to be the opponent this year. That's maybe that's just the way it worked out with the Big East schedule, and when they could do the thing that they wanted to do up there. You'd think they would want to invite somebody that they knew they would win. Of course, they beat Villanova at Marquette, so it's not an easy place for anybody to play.
Well, a lot of times they the teams don't have. They just know they're going to have a home game on that date, and the Big East decides. And a bold statement there, Chris Mack, the Bill Belichick of the Big East. We'll see if he can pull that off. You're putting a lot of weight on his shoulders, but it's going to be an exciting last couple of weeks as we head into the tournament. We just got about a month worth of games left. We'll talk about a lot of things. So get ready, Xavier fans. Saturday, big game, like Jim said, Cintas at 2:30. And if you're not able to get one of those $15 scalp tickets, find your local drinking estabulary and sit down and cheer the Big Blue on. Okay.
They did announce last night that as of last night, there was some standing room only. In fact, I would say that this may break the record for the Cintas Center. I don't know how many standing room only tickets they sell. Of course, the seating capacity right now is listed, I think, at 10,250. But probably look back. I think that Villanova game last year was the biggest game in attendance in Cintas history, but that may be beaten this year because, again, it's the focus game of the country, I think, for Saturday, although there's a lot of other big games going on.
A lot of big games. They had that attendance at 10,727 last year, so we'll see if they can build it. So let's move on to the wrap-up, our trivia and tidbits. We will begin, as we always do, with Jim's attempt to dig deep into the trivia pool and see if I can get a grade above a D-.
Okay, so trivia, Xavier Basketball. We've been talking about the big game coming up. Of course, the Villanova Wildcats this year are ranked number 2 in the country. They're 23-2. Of course, last year when they came to the Cintas Center, they were ranked number 1 in the country. And, of course, the Musketeers came away with the big win. But, again, it's kind of a series of questions. But do you know, in the history of Xavier Basketball, how many times have they defeated number 1 in the country?
Oh, I just looked at that. I was looking at that the other day in prep for the show. I don't know the – it's 4 or 5. I'll say 5, I think it was.
You should have went with the lower one. It is 4.
Of course, now I know I can name them.
Okay, that's my next question. Can you name, actually, they have defeated the number 1 4 times, but it's 3 different schools, meaning they've defeated 1 twice. That's probably a pretty easy one for you. Can you name the one that they defeated twice while ranked number 1? If you don't get this one, you're kicked off the show.
Considering I control the program from this end, Jim, that's not going to happen. But I appreciate your enthusiasm for me. Well, of course, you're talking about the UC Bearcats. We talked about that earlier in the year. They've beaten them twice when they were ranked number 1. Last year's Villanova game, as we've already talked about, the other one. And this is why I was looking for some fun things to put in. The other one, most people probably won't remember because it goes to another conference in another time, but it was St. Joseph's, I believe.
Right.
Not correct, when they were in the A-10, and St. Joe's was ranked number 1, and that will tell you how much that program has changed in the God knows how many years that they've been around.
Yeah, that was a big time in Xavier history. That was the 2004 season, and that was the Lionel Chalmers team that really struggled through the middle of the season. And in fact, to show you how that happened, going into the Atlantic 10 tournament that year, Xavier actually had to play a game. I'm not quite sure what their seeding was, but it was 8th or below in the A-10 because they ended up playing, after they played their first game and won that, they had to play St. Joe's, who was the number 1 seed at that point, and that was a quarterfinal game. And St. Joe at that time was undefeated for the entire season. Of course, the big national media, they were kind of like Gonzaga, where people are saying, should this team really be number 1? Who have they played? Because they were coming from a mid-major conference. So the Musketeers, only on a day's rest, had to take on the St. Joe Hawks, and it was actually, I think, like a noon tip. It was the first game, and it was actually played at UD Arena that year. And it was one of those games where they got off to a hot start, and actually at one point I think they had the Hawks down by like 30 points. But then that team, of course, went on and actually defeated UD in the A-10 finals. They had to win the A-10 or they were not going to get a bid. That's where their record was at that point. They did win it and then continued on that hot streak, and that was a team that went all the way to the Final 8 and lost in a heartbreaking loss to a Duke team that they actually were leading much of the game, but had a major foul out of a post player. Can't even remember his name at this point. And the Dukies, of course, came back and won that game to make it to the Final Four. So that, in fact, I have a video. I was going to look for it. I wanted to watch it. I haven't watched it in a while. It's called The Run. The Xavier made a whole DVD about it and sent it to all the season ticket holders that year. It's a nice story. It has a lot of inside video of the locker rooms and some of the things going on the bench and stuff during that as Xavier fans call it, the run that year. Of course, really boost them into the national spotlight as far as college basketball goes. So
memories. They repeated that run to the Elite Eight in 2008. Of course, a different coach. So fantastic things going on there. Did you have more for me, or was that the end of it?
You got it. That was it. I'll give you an A- like I usually do. You know, you knew it was 4 or 5, and you probably were just thinking 4 was too easy because I always challenge you. So there must have been one that you were missing. So I kind of tricked you.
Well, again, if you want to come back for our TROGcast on Tuesday, we're talking all about NCAA men's basketball. I got a quick one for you as we end it. But first of all, a couple of tidbits. It was on this date in 1773 that William Henry Harrison, our ninth president, was born. Figure, why is that? Of course, he ended up here in Cincinnati. Harrison, Ohio is where he ended up residing, and it takes its name from him and his grandson, Benjamin Harrison, who was also president. And in 1971, Satchel Paige becomes the first African-American ball player who's nominated to baseball's Hall of Fame from the Negro League, from the old-timers. So we had before, of course, others, but for somebody of that ilk to go to baseball's Hall of Fame in 1971, they had others before, like I said, Jackie Robinson and Roy Campanella, but he was the first one that was nominated from the old-timers committee, not directly elected. Now, a quick preview for you. You don't have to worry about this because of time zones and everything, but if you could only watch one game tonight, would it be North Carolina at Duke or Oregon at UCLA?
There's no wrong answer here, huh?
No, just you. But you could only watch them. I think you'd be able to watch them both because they're 8 and 10 o'clock with the only start time. But you can only watch one. Which would it be?
I'd probably watch the Oregon-UCLA game because I saw UCLA a lot early in the season. I haven't seen them lately. I like watching Lonzo Ball and how he distributes the ball, so to speak. And Oregon, I haven't seen that much either. I know they were highly ranked and kind of stumbled early, but now they're coming back strong. And probably, that game might be, well, you got Arizona in there too, might be for a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. Who knows? But I'd say, I don't know, the Duke, North Carolina games, how many have I seen those in my life? They all kind of blend together. It's one of those, I think, if you turn it on with about 2 minutes left, you'll see the most important part of the game.
Well, join us next week on Thursday for our next RazerCast, and then, of course, again on Tuesday for our TROGcast, 2 really old guys talking NCAA sports. And we'll look forward to it. Hopefully we're talking about a big win over Villanova when we come back next week.
Go Muskies.